Starting when I get there? Or is, all right. Good morning, good afternoon. That's right. Good afternoon. Tuesday, March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day 2026 here in House Transportation. And we're adjusting the schedule as our joint fiscal office is not here yet. We're going to the 1:30, right here at 2 o'clock. We're going to the 1:30. We appreciate the agency setting up testimony regarding rail banking and federal rules. And this should be some presentation and then perhaps a chance for some Q&A. I want to ask the agency, whether it was Jackie or Michelle, are going to queue us up. And if you'll recall for the committee, there is a bill on our wall that two of our colleagues presented regarding one portion of the rail trail piece that's out there, and one of the Vermont rail trails. And it is a federal banked, and I want to understand what that means. And we can take it from there. But more in general, what is our role in a federally rail banked system?
Thank you, Chair Walker. And for the record, I'm Jackie Casino. I'm with the Agency of Transportation. I manage the rail trail program. And also give a moment for John Dunleavy, who is able to join us to introduce himself as well. John, if you can hear us.
Yes, can you hear me, folks?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, my name is John Dunleavy. I served as an assistant attorney general from 1980 until 2019. From 1984 until 2019, I was assigned to the Agency of Transportation. And from 1994 until my retirement, I was the chief of the Transportation Legal Unit. And in that capacity, I participated in the legal proceedings that resulted in rail banking of several of the state-owned railroad rights-of-way. And I'm happy to talk about that. I don't know if you want to go on with Jackie's presentation at this point, or?
Sure, John. Yeah, I was just going to make a few points, then I'll hand it back over to you because I imagine you might have a number of questions about that process.
Sure.
Thank you. So my understanding is we're here to brief the committee on the rail banking authorization process, the agency's role as the designated trail sponsor for these trails across the state, management and operations of the trails, inclusive of roles and responsibilities, what the agency is responsible for, what entities outside the agency help with. And then it'll give us a moment also to highlight the role of our management plans that are required to be completed based on our federal funds. So just a reminder, I know I was here earlier in the session, but AOT is the trail sponsor for 145 miles of rail banked lines that function as multimodal corridors across the state of Vermont. We're responsible for the maintenance, operation, marketing, promotion, communications, and engagement with trail towns and stakeholders. These are four-season trails with a variety of trail users, and trail use is diverse and growing, I'm happy to report. These trails, as we touched on earlier, do have a significant economic impact both to the state of Vermont and in particular to the rural communities that so many of our trails run through. So with that, I wanted to give John a chance to discuss the rail banking process and the agency's role as the trail sponsor, and then just open the floor to questions about that. And then after that component, I have some slides that go into a little bit more about management operations, how we engage with folks outside of AOT, and the management plans as well. So John, I'll hand it off to you if that's all right.
Okay, sure. Well, some short background. Since the 1880s, the federal government has regulated railroads. Beginning in 1920, the federal government took over regulation of railroad abandonments. And then in the 1980s, because there were a number of railroad bankruptcies at that time, Congress passed the Federal Rails to Trails Act, which provided a way of authorizing discontinuance of service over rail lines while preserving them as part of the federal rail network for possible future reactivation of railroad service. Vermont was a pioneer in that and was involved in working with the city of Burlington on the Burlington Bike Path and the New North End, which involves a portion of state-owned railroad right-of-way. And that case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court and was one of the leading cases establishing the constitutionality of the rail banking process. This particular line that we're talking about today, the BB Spur, which is up in northern Vermont on the east shore of Lake Memphremagog between downtown Newport and the Canadian border, was proposed for abandonment in 1995 by its previous owner, the Canadian Pacific Railway. The state ended up purchasing the right-of-way from Canadian Pacific, subject to Canadian Pacific having the right to remove the rails. And the federal Interstate Commerce Commission, which shortly thereafter was replaced by the Federal Surface Transportation Board, authorized rail banking and interim trail use of this corridor. What this means is that it continues to be regarded as part of the federal the National Rail Network, and the state of Vermont is designated as the trail sponsor and took over responsibility from Canadian Pacific for ownership of the real estate. So there are a number of camps along this particular line, which runs right next to the lakeshore. And there are a number of leases and private crossings going down to the lake and all of that kind of thing. It's fairly involved from a real estate management standpoint. And so this has basically been the state of affairs for about 30 years. There have also, since the state took over ownership, and this is another factor that affects how it's managed, there have been federal aid projects to improve the trail. This money comes from the Federal Highway Administration, and as with most federal grants, has strings attached, and there are various procedures attached to it, which I think Jackie will get into in her presentation. But that's sort of the legal background for it, and obviously I can answer any questions that you do have. I don't want to get into unnecessary detail, but I certainly am prepared to answer questions that you might have now or at a later point.
Yeah, thanks for your testimony. I think the big question really is if it's rail banked, then the federal government has stipulations associated with this right away. And so do those stipulations limit what we allow and what we don't allow to use the rail trail?
Well, first of all, we have to take action that keeps it intact for possible future reactivation of railroad use. In other words, and just as with an active railroad, there are relations with abutting landowners. But the concept of trail use is that it's interim trail use. The theory is basically that the public interest in operating the trail will provide funding and interest for managing the real estate. And that's basically what's happened here for 30 years. It's been kept open. I think most of the actual restrictions on its use arise from the use of the federal highway money to improve the trail. It has to be, in general, under the federal funding from federal highway, motorized vehicles are not permitted on non-motorized trails and pedestrian walkways, which this is considered. However, there is an exception for snowmobiles during snow conditions where state and local rules permit. We also, because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, have to prevent access by motorized wheelchairs, electric bicycles, and other similar devices that facilitate access by people who aren't ambulatory. And I think Jackie's prepared to get into that in some more detail.
So allowing snowmobiles, well, we have, could the state pass a law that says no snowmobiles on that BB trail?
Well, the state certainly can regulate snowmobile use. I think one of the issues we get into, though, is that we have, I think there are 4 state-managed rail trails that are rail banked. We have the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail, and the D&H Rail Trail, all of which have been improved with federal funds. And we get into an issue of equal protection and equity. I think we would have to show some very exceptional circumstances for special restrictions on the BB spur.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate you joining us this morning, this afternoon. I keep wishing it was morning as much as we got to do. And, appreciate your work on it in the past, and appreciate your time joining us and your flexibility on changing the schedule as the floor has done to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jackie, I guess it's over to you.
Oh, that's all I had to say. I didn't. Again, I will answer questions if you have any, but I think it was at this point I'd turn things over to Jackie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. It'd be great to have you continue to sit in case things organically pop up. Right, so I just wanted to take a few moments to go through the process for management and operations on these trails. So the next few slides will detail trail management and operations, inclusive of roles and responsibilities. I touched base on this my last time in front of this committee, but just to reiterate, our partnerships with the regional planning commissions, the rail trail councils, municipalities, key stakeholders are really critical for the success of these trails. These partnerships are really formalized primarily through the rail trail councils. There's been one established for each of these 4 trails. And they play a critical role in serving as the conduit for the trail towns, for stakeholders, local trail-based businesses, and other groups to the agency. They really provide the opportunity for a voice in the management of these trails in a collaborative and a consistent way across the state. The primary function of these councils are to support management plan implementation, identify and prioritize local projects, engage with trail communities, coordinate volunteers, and to support a variety of educational programs and events that happen across these trails. They really are our eyes and ears because quite often folks are operating businesses or live locally that are part of these trail councils. And similar to the regional planning commissions, the rail trail councils provide that regional perspective and balance. It's really critical for these statewide assets, ensuring that not one voice or one perspective is overshadowing others, right? So that's the idea behind them. And just again, a reminder of who's doing what on these trails. AOT is responsible for the maintenance and operations on these trails. That's us. It's not another group. One exception is during the winter for grooming. We're very fortunate to have great partnerships with groups like the Memphremagog Trails and VAST across the state, who really ensure that the trails are groomed and are open and are accessible during the winter months. My team does not have a groomer, so it's not something that we do. Right? A well-managed trail system also needs clear policies and procedures for what can be done, when and how. So our trail operations focuses on establishing consistent and clear policies and procedures for really everything you can think of, soup to nuts, right? From trail standards and guidelines, from our trail surface material to our branding that has been approved by the chief marketing office for the state. It also looks at allowable uses and use permits, as well as agreements in supporting public and private trail access. So everything from crossing agreements to trailheads. So just taking a look statewide, we have 461 ongoing property management agreements. And we have over 50 on the BB Spur alone. So there's a lot of abutting property owners along all of our trails. And part of what we do is ensure that we're working with them to make sure that they're in compliance with our rules and regulations, but that also we are responding to them as well. There's 27 trailheads that are maintained across the state, primarily by towns, as well as the rail trail councils. And then finally, again, for those corridor-wide activities, whether it's utility agreements or grooming, we have master license agreements. We also deal with encroachments and enforcement issues, and in resolving user conflicts. And just to highlight, one of the ways that we do this is through a multi-pronged approach, right? Through education and outreach, through making sure our signage and promotional materials are clear, and when we have to engage in enforcement. And so just to take, for example, winter trail etiquette, is one thing that we do in terms of partnerships with the various groups that groom the trails. We make sure pre-season, we have a sit down with them. We make sure to check in with them regularly throughout the season and at the end of the season to check in with them as well. So there's that, soft touch that's really important. There's also, if you go to our website, railtrails.vermont.gov, there's more information than you ever really want to consume in one sitting. One of the things is what's allowed, what can I do on the trail, right? So we have promotional videos, both for summer use and winter use. So I just wanted to take a moment and show folks this because I feel like it, as long as it plays, it highlights how we operate on the trails. Let's see if we can do this. Sorry about that. We're gonna do that. Hold on.
Been there before, haven't
We just try to be multimodal here. But anyway, there's some good examples on this website that show how a variety of users can safely operate on the trail, both in the winter and the summer. Apologies for my lack of technical skills. So again, going back to, just thinking about whether it's winter trail etiquette, let's get going. The promotional materials we hand out, working with key stakeholders, making sure that we're listening when complaints come in. And then if it does get to the point that there's repeat offenders, trail user safety is significantly impacted, or the trail itself, state property is being damaged, then we engage in enforcement partners. And that's something we do across all 4 trails. It's also something that organizations like VAS do during their season as well. So in general, I think we've been very responsive in those situations. I just wanted to take the last few slides to talk a little bit about our management plan process. Management plans for each of these 4 trails are required for the agency to complete. It's also just good practice to do so, right? The Lamoille Valley Rail Trail was the first trail that we completed a management plan for in 2022, and we are just wrapping up the final 3, and we worked on those throughout 2024 and 2025. I just wanted to give you an example of what that looks like in the engagement process for one of our plans, which was for the BB Spur Rail Trail. Here up on this slide, you'll see there's 5 primary goals for the management plan process. But in a nutshell, what a management plan seeks to do is to garner stakeholder input outside of the Rail Trail Council The Rail Trail Councils are entities that meet monthly. So this is something that's above and beyond that. And really the idea is to get input on regional priorities as well as any potential projects and issues. And really what it does is it articulates a vision, defines goals for a cohesive trail system. And through this planning process, the public has been able to provide input through online maps, surveys, stakeholder interviews, and public meetings, right? Just one example for one of our trails is for the BB Spur. There was that public input tool and survey. We had over 400 people for all three of our trails to participate in that survey. We conducted stakeholder interviews. The BB is pretty unique, and that is, I like to say, a small cog and a larger hub. There are a variety of trail groups in this area that operate either trails or facilities that connect to the BB or are interested in connecting to this trail. So it really serves as a core or an anchor for this network. We were able to participate in a great event that happens during the summer in downtown Newport. They're Wednesdays on the waterfront. I tell you, if you offer free ice cream, you get hundreds of people, in particular children, that are very interested to comment on the planning process. It was a great event, and we were able to get a number of folks involved in the planning process through that. And then the Rail Trail Council as well for the BB Spur. So there was this engagement component. There's also, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We also looked at a number of planning documents or projects that the city of Newport and other groups have completed in and around this area over the last few years in particular. And so from those two areas, we were able to really have some key takeaways. And what we heard from what these groups were really interested in doing in the next few years is looking at improved connections to existing trails, to downtown Newport, cross-border connectivity to Quebec. There's a rail trail right across the border as well. And you can actually take your bike and go right through the Border Patrol and connect up there. So it's a great opportunity. There's other organizations that the agency is working with to also look at gravel routes around the lake as well. So there's a lot of things happening. We heard loud and clear, folks want public lakeshore access, right? People are interested in additional facilities and amenities like signage, benches, repair stations, things like that. Folks are also interested in looking at shoreline restoration opportunities along the lake where some areas have been impacted. Maintenance issues always come up. And then more events. So this in particular, because it's such a short trail, is a really great example of where those events that are drawing in hundreds of people every summer, whether it's through Men for Magog trails or downtown Newport. You might have a family that comes in and the adults are interested in riding their mountain bikes on single track on Men for Magog trails, but they need somewhere to take the kids. So here's the BB Spur, right? So that cohesive connectivity for this trail is really important. And that's what we heard a lot about this past summer. Won't go into too many details on this, but for each of our trails, from all of that we gathered, we develop a vision for each of the trails, and the Rail Trail Council helps us with this as well, right? And then if you're really interested in planning, you can dive into the 5 primary goals that are associated with this trail. And I like to think of them as buckets. And then it's not a plan that sits on the shelf, right? The idea behind this plan is really a foundation or roadmap, both for my program as well as the Trail Council to really sink their teeth into and take action, right? So an example of that is, this first goal right here, to cultivate a distinct trail identity anchored in the lakeside location and many trail connections. You take that a step further. How are we going to do that? Here's one action step that is supportive of that goal, right? So to support the evolution of the Rail Trail Council, to include stakeholders, engage membership, cultivate trail champions, and advance initiatives that focus on improved community connections. Each of these strategies has lead roles identified, whether it's the agency, the RPC, or the Trail Council, or others, and it gives us a time frame, right? So the idea is that each Rail Trail Council is working on their version of this in their annual work plan in partnership with the agency. So this is a very structured and clear way for us to be able to hear from folks in the areas that the trails run through. So I just want to take a step back and just say, I think for us in the program, the highlights really are the opportunity to engage is through that Rail Trail Council, through the management plans, and then of course contacting us directly. Yes.
Do all those trails have snowmobilers on them in the winter? They do, okay. What was the decision to have the BB Spur go to snowmobiling this past year?
Yeah, no, so I think that's an excellent question. So the BB Spur has always been open to snow machines. And the difference is that some of the routes that the local club has been using, the lake has not consistently been freezing over. And so some of the local residents who have bought the BB Spur have said, instead of us just using it, because there is a cross trail that is that goes across the BB Spur. So their question was, can we take the BB Spur back to our homes, right? When the lake is not frozen over and we're unable to access this area. And that I think it's just something that's been perhaps a little bit different, just given the conditions of the lake, is my understanding.
Once that decision's been made, that's locked in for the long run, eternity.
It's in statute that these trails are open to
Okay.
snow machines, that all four trails are, right? So, and it is, this trail is, you know, and again, Vass can speak more to this. But the Vass network is extensive in that county, and this is not a trail that people are really interested in using as a corridor trail, right? It's not even really a feeder trail. It's really open to folks that live on the trail and are wanting to get back to their homes. And if you think about it from again, not a Vass member, so you think about it from their perspective, I don't know that's that exciting to ride up and down a 4-mile stretch of trail that's straight and flat when they have such an extensive network. So again,
Yeah, it is a dead end.
what we've heard both from the Mid-for-Magog Trails group this winter, as well as the local club, is that things have been going well. They've been making sure to communicate with each other on a regular basis. And, you know, the agency has not received any calls or complaints since the snowmobile season has started. So again, so far it's been really working very similar to, you know, our other, we have over 140 miles of trails outside of this trail network that are open to Vass, and they go through downtowns, right? Morrisville, Hardwick, very narrow areas where there's a lot of quote unquote stuff in the right of way, and folks need to slow down and be respectful. And so far that has seemed to be working.
Thank you. So, can we assume that there have not been issues with snowmobiles and skiers, or snowmobiles and snowshoers on the 4 different rail trails that AOT oversees? There have not been issues.
Right, correct. I mean, there's not been an issue that's been reported to us. There's not been an issue that, in terms of our regular communication with the local clubs and the rail trail councils, that has not been an issue that has come up.
So I think we heard some testimony from another member who proposed a bill to get the BB Spur closed to snowmobiles because there was concern about interaction between snowmobiles and skiers and very narrow sections. And but so can we assume that the users of the trail that are unhappy with the current situation have not gone through the appropriate channels to communicate their concerns or try to come up with a resolution?
Yes, I would say the agency has not heard directly from any trail users that this is an issue as of this year. I think we heard ahead of the snowmobile season from a select number of abutting property owners. So I would say yes to your basic answer.
And the abutting property owners, you had heard from them prior to the snow season,
Correct.
that they were concerned, or
Yes.
that they were concerned? Okay,
Yes.
going into this season. you
Yes.
Heard from them, okay.
Correct.
But they, and was that, did they, once they shared their concerns with you, where could they go from there?
Yeah, so I offered to attend local select board and city council meetings. Was not invited. And then also let them know that the Rail Trail Council meets monthly. Happy to have folks attend. There's often other agenda items, but they're open to the public. And then ahead of the grooming season, we met with the Mid-for-Magog Trails Group, as well as VAST. And so those are the folks that are grooming the trail, not VAST, but the Memphremagog Trails Group, as well as VAST was operating on the trail, just to have a conversation about how Memphremagog Trails grooms, where they lay ski tracks, concerns they have, opportunities to partner on other trail. And we can go on and on because they work together quite often and share other trail networks as well in this area. So, and we're doing that at the end of the season as well, just to check in and see how things are going.
So if they went through the appropriate channels, or do you have tools in your toolbox? If you hear that there are concerns because trails are really narrow or
Yes.
going too fast, is there signage that they could deploy? So you've
Yes,
got some
there's
solutions
definitely-
in mind.
Yes, and this trail is marked at 15 miles an hour, which is always an option that a community has if they are concerned about, the speed limit for snow machines on state lands elsewhere in the state is 35 miles an hour, but we do have a number of downtowns and villages that opt to request that lower speed limit and work with VAST to do so as well. And so typically, if we were to, just like any trail user complaint, whether it's a loose dog or an e-bike or a car on the trail, as soon as we hear a complaint, that's something we want to know, the details of what's going on, where is it happening? Is this a repeat issue? Is this a one-time thing? The more details we can get, the better. And then in a situation like what you're describing, my first response would be to engage the local club. And because they do have safety committee, they do have the opportunity to bring on enforcement during the winter seasons as well. And that's something that works statewide for VAST.
Representative Burt?
Yeah, I just want to say, I find this whole thing so exciting, really, that the state maintains these trails. I mean, it's a lot of effort to do it. It's a really good thing. And I really hope someday to get on the Royal Valley Rail Trail every year. I saw them do it. But I may have asked you this before. Have you ever been on the West River Trail?
I have, it's been a while, but yes.
The West River Trail it's an old rail trail, single gauge railroad that used to go in from Brattleboro to Jamaica. And there was books been written about it called 36 Miles of Trouble, because there were frequent derailments and, bridges going down and picture of the train over the West River. Anyway, but it's just been revived. A group sort of found that it didn't really belong to anybody, the land, and they were able to buy the land and create this whole Friends of the West River Trail. And it's just so many people use it for walking and biking and skiing. And I don't know if there've been any snowmobiles on it, in the winters. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's just another sort of thing that happens down in our town. Great resource.
Okay, we're running out of time with all of our guests for our next presentation. Representative Wells?
Representative Woody Page from Newport came in and testified as my classmate was testing too. And I think he had over 100 signatures of various complaints of not wanting machines near their land, not wanting North Country's Nordic team to be pushed off the trail by snowmobiles, etc. He probably should contact you.
You certainly can.
Okay.
Yeah. So this image right here is the BB spur as well. So it is not, a 7-foot wide path. It's just not. And so far, my understanding is that the Nordic team is able to operate just like Lamoille Valley Union is on the LVRT, a number of other ski clubs are. Bill Koch League is in that area as well. The Memphremagog Trails Group puts that on as the sponsor of that. So, again, so far from what the agency has heard from folks, once the season started, things seem to be functioning as they always have been. I think there's a lot of, understandably, right, questions, concerns, ahead of the season, like what is this going to look like? How could these things coexist? And again, sorry about the feedback. Our video is really great and shows, how do snow machines and dog sleds interact, right? How do snow machines and skiers, interact on the trail? And so there's space to do that, space to share the trail. And it's one of the things that makes these trails so accessible. It's not a private network. It is open to the public.
And VAST clears that trip lane.
The Memphremagog Trails clears this trail, or they groom this trail, I should say, excuse me.
Representative Corbin?
Yes, speaking of Representative Page, while he was here, this is for John Dunleavy. There was a letter that he submitted to this committee, and I believe the your coworker, Scott Whitted, I think that might is, I'm probably butchering his last name, but you're CC'd on this document that was dated September 30th, 1997. And you were obviously the assistant back then too. But he highlighted a couple sections, and it's unfortunate we probably can't put it up on the screen so you can reference it. But a couple things that he highlighted in this was motorized vehicles are not permitted anywhere on this trail. And this is regarding the BB spur rails to trails. And I was just wondering if you could comment on sort of the analysis that was done by your, I don't know if it was your boss, coworker at the time, stating that, yes, we are allowed not to ban motorized vehicles on this trail.
Yes, that letter was written in the context of a application for an Act 250 jurisdictional opinion. And the ruling ended up being that there was no Act 250 jurisdiction. The current law in this area is both the federal law says that motorized vehicles are not permitted on pedestrian and bike paths that receive federal highway funding, except there is an exception for snowmobiles in the snowmobile season. And that is also addressed in the current state statute on rail trail use, which is in Title 5, Section 3408, Sub A. So yes, I am aware of that letter.
Okay, you might have froze up a little
but
bit.
it had a
There you
certain
go.
context. It was 30 years ago.
Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
there have been changes over that.
Okay, so you feel it's really not relevant to the conversation that is before us, or not before us, but
Well, it's part of the history, but I don't think it's the complete picture as to the current situation.
okay, thank you.
Okay, you get the last word? Well,
Very quick, have we got a sense of the average length of time that is snow covered?
In this area.
Yeah, it'd be the trail, that's what we're talking about.
That's a great one. Every year is different.
Yes,
Okay.
oh, it is.
So that's sort of a good question. And I think we have better coverage in this part of the state than we do, say, on the DNH trail. That was a very good year for the DNH trail and the local burners down there as well. So I don't, but I'm happy to get back to you on that. I can reach out to the local club and just ask them, and I'll reach out to the ski club as well.
It may be helpful to understand the inconvenience.
Right. I know that they just, and recently speaking with the head of the Men for Magog Trails who grooms that trail, he said we're done for the season, and it's a little early, but probably getting to the average, but I can follow up on that.
Yeah.
okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dunleavy, for coming in, and Jack, thank you for coming back to the
Thank you.
committee again. And I think now we're moving to the kind of 220 piece. We're an hour plus late after Florida, but we are talking about the local options tax pilot program, picking up on the piece that we heard in the joint session with the Senate. And I think Logan, I'm not sure if Logan or Ted is gonna kind of take us through setting the stage for what I'm looking for the committee's support on, is that what we're going to see or not see related to the amount of pilot funds that are out there and collected through local option tax split. And maybe we'll talk about it more after we see the information. But we know that 12 towns are going to come on board on local options tax, and the pilot fund is already fully funded. And I know that Town Highways Network is not going to be satisfied by our effort that we do to fix the T fund, which everybody has worked on tremendously. That doesn't bring help directly to any of the town highway aid, town structures, or any other activity that goes on within municipalities across the state. So that's what the conversation's about. We're looking to build on, we're used to doing things ourselves, I guess. So we were on that joint session. a joint committee hearing. And now we're looking to get a better understanding on pilot money, local option tax money, and the language that Damien walked us through at the end of last week about potentially doing something in our T-bill to help our town highway network. Thank you for joining us in committee. We're happy to have you. And you want to, Ted, you want to introduce yourself and sort of take us through how does pilot work, how much money there is, whatever, all the pieces that you're bringing together, and what we anticipate on these new towns, and all kinds of questions I'm hoping we're going to get to.
Sure. Ted Burnett, Joint Fiscal Office. It's good to see you all on your home turf, as opposed into a joint committee room. I am going to spend most of my time talking about the various uses out of the pilot special fund and anticipated revenue with updated numbers from municipalities that have voted to adopt a local option. With the big caveat, obviously, these numbers don't include Stowe's changes because, right, those require a charter change and that to go through the legislature. So this is just looking at the municipalities that have elected a 1% local option tax on sales or any combination of meals and rooms taxes. And so I'm going to show you information for based on what was signed into law in the FY26 DAA, and then what we're looking at based on what is currently in the governor's recommended budget for fiscal year 27, and then our new estimated pilot fund revenue. I'm happy to, if I did give you all a presentation on general pilot and payments to municipalities, and there is some information for other presentations on how those are calculated. That's not going to be a part of this presentation, but I'm happy to follow up with folks who are willing to get into those weeds and understand mechanically how specific towns, what is included in state-owned buildings and how that correlates into a specific pilot payment. So within this document, kind of a roadmap of how this works, the fund balance at the beginning of the fiscal year is in line 1. And the 2 columns here kind of in a salmon color, those are going to reflect
Table, it's, you're blocking out.
Remember that table AI generated? It's a strange.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that part.
That's what it says. There we go.
It's not very
You can't trust the computer. Trust the computer, but we can trust Ted. We know we can trust Ted.
I wouldn't go so far as use the word intelligence, but it's all natural as opposed to artificial.
How about actual?
Yeah, actual. There we are. So apologies for that. Yep. And I will resist the temptation to move my cursor close to the table, lest it shows that it's AI generated. Okay, so yes, the 2 columns that are headed in like a salmon color reflect FY26 information, and then the next 2 columns to the right are FY27. Lines 2 through 10 refer to various appropriations and expenditures from the pilot special fund. It is worth noting that although there are various appropriations within the pilot special fund, the actual amount that is spent for these various line items, right? Appropriations are spending authority. The actual amount that is spent in these different line items are different. So within this fund summary or budget outlook, we break that down. We have information about appropriations and expenditures, and that is contained. Oh man, I almost did it. In lines 10 through 10 or 2 through 10. And then finally at the bottom, which is I'm sure the numbers you all are most interested in, are information on revenues, estimated revenues in fiscal years 26 and 27. So I am happy to walk through. I'll move to going through the line by line, but I already see questions.
Just a quick question. I'm assuming that I get this, where the 1X, that means one-time appropriations within that fund, and the ones that don't say that are ongoing. So the reappraisal listing program, that's going out until whenever. So that's where I'm just trying to figure out like what's embedded in those numbers. So basically you have what, 2, 3, 4 that are embedded into the program and the rest are one-times?
Yes, that's so right. And I'll walk through the
Oh, okay.
specific line by line,
Yeah.
for y'all.
Yeah, that was sort of my question, you know, the ones that are sort of fixed, and then the ones that, you know, the appropriations look at now each year, they're, you know, and say, hey, what's in there? Let's apply it somewhere else. So some are fixed, and then I'd be curious, is there a formula for the fixed, like the correctional facilities, or is it a number that's in statute? And then these others, you're gonna say are just one time for this year's budget.
Exactly, yeah. So that's a good segue. I'll do the line by line and provide color commentary as necessary for each. So starting in line 2 with the general pilot payment, these are the payments to municipalities for the value of state-owned buildings within their jurisdiction. If you remember from the joint hearing on local option taxes, these are based on the insurance value of state-owned properties. There's a state-owned building inventory. AOA has a contractor. The contractor goes out and assesses a certain percentage of them, and they maintain a master sheet of all of the state-owned property buildings within a specific municipality, and they receive payments based on those assessed values, the CLA within a specific municipality, and the town's budget. And that there's a calculation that's done by folks in the Division of Property Evaluation and Review of the Department of Taxes. And so towns every year in the fall receive a payment for the value of state-owned buildings. And so within both the FY26 PAA and in the FY27 GovRec, that appropriation amount is $12.2 million. We have final information on FY26. We know those payments have already gone out the door. And so in the second salmon color, it shows that the actual expenditure in that line is $11.35 million. The appropriation is in there for 12.2 to be, they wanted to make sure they had enough spending authority. They don't necessarily know when they're constructing the budget how much final payments are going to be, because it depends on a number of factors. So they budget that a little conservatively. But we'll note that the actual payments that went out the door were a little lower than the appropriation amount.
So let's stick on too. You mentioned the CLA and all that. So if we just took a snapshot to this year of what those payments are, will they be, is it exact the same next year, or that adjusts a little bit based on CLA? But there's some kind of rate there that sort of says, apply this number and put it in the formula, and out came this year, 12.2, and estimated next year, 12.2.
Yeah, so they're taking a look at what they anticipate the mechanics of the CLA and the value of state-owned property. So yeah, there are two main factors within that is the collective value of state-owned buildings, and over time, the value of those buildings increases, or if the state acquires more buildings, that gets added to the pot. The governor here is that as CLAs are decreasing substantially as property values go up, pilot payments are multiplied by the CLA. And so what that means is that the pilot payments, there's not a lot of upward pressure. If anything, the CLA is kind of keeping them roughly where they are. So yes, the Department of Taxes is and folks within, as they're developed as part of the budget development process, right, they're probably doing some work to understand what the pilot payment might be, and including an appropriation amount. And having looked at these payments, I don't anticipate them being substantially different going
They might
because of
go up
those.
just a little bit, but unless we build something big, large, a new state building. Okay, thank you.
The next line is the correctional facilities pilot of $40,000. So this is for folks who have a correctional facility within municipal borders. It's an additional payment. This amount has been the same since the start of the pilot program in the late 90s. And so that number is consistent, and it's within the budget, and there's a way to calculate that additional payment based on the towns that have correctional facilities.
Representative.
Is this above and beyond what they would have got? Okay, so it's like an extra bonus because maybe the municipalities have more, costs associated with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Ted. That hasn't changed, that 40,000 hasn't changed since when?
Since the beginning of the
Which is.
pilot, the pilot
Starts
program
with
as we know
19?
now, was created in Act 60 of 1997. So,
97.
yeah, so it's been,
Turns out it's a popular year in
I know.
testimony today.
I know, yeah.
Who knew?
the payment for Newport and Springfield correctional facilities is based on a contract. I won't go into the details of those specific contracts are a bit beyond my knowledge, but yes, it's for these two specific correctional facilities. It's negotiated with the towns. That's pretty much the extent, and that number is also expected to be consistent, and it is in the budget.
Representative Pound?
So these two towns would get their general pilot adjustment. And do they also get some of that 40,000?
They do not. They're outside of the correct.
So, okay, this is, so correctional institutes are sort of divided up. Some get this number 3 and Newport and Springfield get number 4.
Correct. And so in total, there's $192,000 for correctional facilities through the pilot program. The next line is the Municipal Grand List Stabilization Program. This is designed to reimburse municipalities for property tax revenue that they lose when properties participate in the FEMA buyout process. This was a $1 million appropriation. Actual expenditures and this was intended when the appropriation went through. This was intended to carry the program for a few years. In FY26, the estimated expenditures for that program is approximately $82,000. And then in fiscal year 27, it increases to $200,000 as more properties make it through the buyout process. The telecom valuation project line in item 6 is 2 years ago, communications property was to be, it specifies that it is be added to the grand list as real estate. So this line is for a contractor to help PBR establish a schedule of valuation for that communications property and help towns add that property to their grand list. Line 7 is something y'all are more familiar with than I am. I'm certainly not in the transportation space. So I will defer to folks who have more knowledge, but it's a 1-year appropriation for disasters that don't qualify for federal assistance, but you all wanted to provide some money for towns for that. Those types of projects. And then the last line is there were per parcel payments. There are per parcel payments to municipalities for maintenance of their grand list and reappraisal costs. So those were previously provided to the general fund, and this shifts it to the pilot special fund. So this was in FY26 BAA, and then also carried forward in the GovRec budget. And so, yes, the total uses in FY26, if you add up all the expected expenditures, is about almost 16.7 million. And then for expected expenditures in the through the FY27 GovRec construct, it's approximately $16.1 million. Comparing that to revenues in line 10, we put our heads together with the Department of Taxes on this one in FY26, estimating almost $14.9 million from the current pool of folks with local option taxes. Note that the effective date of the shift in allocation, so before fiscal year 26, revenue from local option taxes was allocated 30% to the pilot special fund. And effective October 1, 2025, that decreased to 25%. So that's considered here. And so in FY 26, the difference between revenue and expenses means that the fund started with 15 million at the top in line one. Expenditures are estimated to be almost 16.7 million. And so the balance is, the fund balance is 15 million, expenditures are 16.7, revenue is only 14.8. And so, expenses are over revenue. And so, there's a difference of approximately $1.8 million between revenue and expenses. And so the fund balance goes from 15 million to 13 million estimated at the end of FY 26.
It's not sustainable. That's what you're saying.
But-
If you don't get-
but-
But if you don't get the new.
In FY 27,
Yeah.
since there are a number of folks or municipalities that have adopted a local option tax, when you add the additional revenue from those municipalities and also grow the sales and meals and use tax base for folks who currently have a local option tax, we're estimating that the revenue from fiscal year 26 to 27 would increase from 14.9 million to almost $16.2 million.
Plus one. I'm just trying to do the math in my head, so it's like a plus one. If you go on the expenditure, a little over $1 million.
It's a little over $1 million. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that combined with the fact that the money for non-federal disasters is no longer, it was a one-time spending source. And so the difference between revenue and expenses is in fiscal year 27 right now. We're estimating, if all else holds from here, they're almost exactly aligned. It's 40,000 more in expected revenue than expenses. And so the fund balance would go from 13.2 to 13.25 estimated, roughly speaking. So the deficit or the difference between revenue and expenses, right, whereas negative in FY 26, in FY 27, we're expecting that it'd be roughly similar.
Would that be in a time frame that you're saying that all those towns would have come online? That would be the entire amount of those potentially 13 new towns? Because they're not all going to get online in the same time frame. Is it an estimate of that entire?
This is
They can limit it to 5, et cetera. So I guess clarify that where that estimate revenue comes from, what makes it up, and what would it look like in 28 or 29 potentially?
So it is incorporating a bit of if it's effective right July 1, the additional local option tax, you're not seeing folks submit returns in August, right? So this is all factoring in 11 months of revenue within this estimate. Municipalities would see 3 disbursements of revenue, so it's a little bit different for them. But yes, as far as I understand, there's not going to be a substantial delay in these local option taxes coming online through the Department of Taxes. That's why that's this estimate, and we checked in with them.
Of all 13?
Of the-
They're not
of the
going to
folks.
limit it to the only 5?
They're not going to limit it to only the 5.
Appreciate it. Representative Powers?
Yeah, a couple questions. Trying to understand, what are obligated and what are necessarily not. The number 5, muni stabilization, those properties are identified now, and there's a time frame for how long we provide some help for those municipalities. But then there might be other properties that come in. Any idea on whether the payment, well, I guess the next storm might cause more properties to be purchased out, I guess. So on that number, so any thoughts on, is it stable? Could it go way up? Could it,
Good question. The $200,000 is more reflective of the current magnitude of properties and the amount we would expect to see in the program. There is a certain time limitation for the payments, and I understand they scale down eventually over time. I don't remember the exact mechanics and how they would come off. But I will note that these numbers, I wouldn't expect them to see them ramp up substantially. And I would imagine that the expenses would be roughly similar to that, but it depends on how many properties make it through the buyout process, and we didn't assume any additional storm, right? For example, we're looking at the properties that are currently in the pipeline and who are, yeah.
Is this fund in statute that it will continue forever? Or is it just the $1 million? Here's how it's going to be spent. And it would have to be renewed.
So the fund, as far as I understand it, this money was intended to cover the expenses of the fund for a couple of years. And in which case there would be an evaluation of the properties that are currently in the buyout program, some forecasts of how much revenue would be needed to make those payments. There's not a dedicated revenue source as far as I remember. And so I think this $1 million appropriation was intended to stand up the program, and then folks could reevaluate funding needs in a couple of years once we have more data on the number of properties that have actually made it through.
In line 6 and 7, there's a set amount of funds put aside, and when those are gone, they're gone.
Yes, and the telecom valuation project is $500,000. The Department of Taxes is anticipating spending about $150,000 per year. So 3 years. And so ending in fiscal year 28, right? And the extra 50,000, they may have additional costs beyond that. But yes, that is a one-time. It's related to contractor costs in building this valuation model. So once that's done, it should be done. And then yes, the AOT, non-federal disasters, was a one-time program limited to fiscal year 26.
And over the years, we've built up this surplus. In previous years, have there been other, expenses like, 5, 6, and 7, which now have disappeared? Or are these sort of we had the program, it's been running since 97, and, we figured out how we're providing support for the municipalities, which primarily this does. Have there been other one-time allocations of the surplus prior to 4, 5, and 6, or 5, 6, and 7?
I will note that the pilot special fund payments to municipalities have been prorated from the beginning of the program up until fiscal year 24. And so there was not enough money in the fund to make full pilot payments. And so folks were not taking money out of the fund with permitted payments. The telecom valuation project, the $500,000 that was in the BAA, is a adjustment of an appropriation they originally received in 2024. It was $150,000 to start this, to build up this valuation model. And so that was the first, to my knowledge, use of the pilot special fund that wasn't the items that are traditionally in the payment, right? The general pilot payments to municipalities and correctional facility pilot payments. There was a payment to Montpelier that once pilot payments were fully funded, that payment was discontinued.
So up until it was fully funded, the pilot program, which is 2024.
It was the first year it was fully funded.
How did the balance get so big from there to now?
So for a large span of time, the balance stayed pretty much the same. And so only more recently, when revenue started to substantially outpace expenditures, did the balance grow. I will also note that in the appropriations process, folks were doing estimates on the amount of payments they could make, and they were making estimates of the amount of revenue that they were expecting from local option taxes, and they were likely budgeting conservatively to make sure that they weren't substantially drawing down a fairly minimal fund balance.
Thank you.
How many
we heard what, 13 towns for this year. We know how many added last year, the year before, the year before. Do you have a ballpark about what the participation has gone up in the last 3, 4, 5? I don't want you to go back to 1997, but can you give me an idea of, do we know what the participation has gone up per town over the last, how many years might go off the top of your head? Does anybody?
I would prefer not to use numbers off the top of my head. I have a general sense. I can provide it to the committee and
All that stuff, right?
there might be some folks who know the answer to that question as well. Yeah, but yes, I'm happy to, I have information from the Department of Taxes on the number of town going back from 2017 to 2025, and then I'd have to fill it in for 26. And be sure, but it's the number in 26 was 5 to 7 towns. Yep.
This is I understand that, but we are not gonna have a situation where people that are on the witness list get a chance to come in and comment whenever, but we're asking you. So I guess I will say, I'm asking you, if you'd like to comment from the gallery in terms of if you specifically know the number of towns that have added in the last 5 years, and limit to that, please.
I do, Josh Hanford, Legacies in Towns. The substantial increase in the last 2 years is directly resulted of the change made 2 years ago. It allows local option tax to be adopted by the voters and not through a charter change. First year, there was 7 added, and this year there was 13 added.
So thank you very much. So you gotta think, when these towns start getting their money for their infrastructure projects and their pieces, that this activity is likely to grow for several years to come, or who knows what. So the projections that you've made for this next year becomes higher, likely be higher depending on economy, activity, et cetera. But certainly participation interest. I believe we heard in earlier testimony that it was way more than 19 towns. I think we heard 30 some odd towns inquired about information regarding local option tax. So that is a substantial interest beyond what the 19 that put it on their ballot. So I gotta believe that the number of 1.2 or 1.3 million for this 25% share will only look to continuously increase. The reappraisal listing payments there, that B139, the 3.4 million that's out, how many years is that out there budgeted for or appropriated for? Or I'm sorry, I missed that. How long is that going for?
I am going to defer to Chris, but as far as I understand, in the governor's recommended budget, it was a change in session law that would adjust these payments for FY27. I know there are a lot of conversations about potentially continuing that change long term.
Not in the law to require to continue it past. Maybe you could comment on how long.
Christmas joint fiscal, this arrangement was first proposed by the governor in his FY27 budget. The House agreed to do this shift of costs beginning in FY26, which ended up making it in the BAA. This was really the first time this had been contemplated. And to be clear, the House Appropriations Committee has not finalized its decision-making yet on the budget, but my understanding is continuing this as the governor proposed is included in their construct. And this cost it grows a little bit over time, but it doesn't grow like gangbusters. It's somewhat stable. It's been hovering in like the low 3 million range for the last 5 years or so.
And it has to be proposed every year. It's not guaranteed. It's not in a statute that it says it's going to be there in 2028 or 2020.
There are proposed language changes that would make this an allowable expenditure out of the pilot fund in statute. And just to remind the committee, the legislature notwithstands and changes statute all the time to change which pocket it takes bills out of. So just because a decision is made at the present time to do something doesn't mean a future legislature.
Okay. Well, I'll reserve my comment on that for, I'll appreciate that. Representative White?
Yeah, thank you. I just have 2 questions to make sure I'm understanding these different payments. So reappraisal and listing payments that Chair Walker was just referring to, those are payments given to towns who are undertaking the reappraisal process in their town?
Yes, and it's per parcel. So there's an $8.50. The combination is, it ends up being $9.50. But yes, it's based on the number of parcels in each.
Okay, and our understanding is that some towns have not done a reappraisal in many years. So this is getting everybody, or a plan to get towns up to speed, or no?
But this is just deciding where to pay the cost out of. This cost typically had been out of the general fund. This proposal is just from the pilot fund, but the towns get these per parcel payments. I think $1 to help with equalization study and $8.50 to maintain.
Yeah. Okay, yep.
Okay, thank you. And then the telecoms valuation project. Could you talk about that again? Is that towns that have telecommunications towers? Yeah.
There was a bill 2 years ago to modernize the tax treatment of various communication property telecom. It adjusted the universal service, the funding source for the Universal Service Fund. And as a part of that bill, the decision was made to add communications property, which is broadly defined. It could be towers, it could be switching equipment, it could be it's stuff associated with running telecommunications services more broadly. And so that property was subject to a different tax. And so the decision was made to add that property to the grand list as real estate. And recognizing, right, that this would be a substantial lift for municipalities to value that property. It's complex, it's towers, it's switches, it's the Department of Taxes. The bill made money available to have the Division of Property Valuation and Review contract with someone to build out a valuation model that municipalities could use to understand how much to value a tower at their line.
So it's kind of like a reappraisal process for telecommunications as opposed to the reappraisal and listing payments for houses.
It's not a reappraisal, it's newly adding this
It's an appraisal.
equipment to the grand list, and yes, figuring out how to appraise it in the first place. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Pat?
I thought, town reappraisals, they were given money based on deeds, copies and all that. That's where that money came from. Is this in addition to that money that comes to the town so they can do reappraisals?
So I do not know a huge amount about property valuation, but yes, the reappraisal and listing payments, yes, $8.50 is for grand list $8.50 is for grand list maintenance, and $1 is for the equalization study, as Chris said. In terms of how money is received, or how towns receive money to complete reappraisals in the schedule, that's I would have to follow up with and get more information on that.
I guess I think there was already money that automatically comes that allows towns to do that work. And I'm assuming this is above and beyond that because there's so much work. No, never mind.
No, this is not additive, this is shifting which bucket the existing statutory payments are being paid out of that budget.
All right, thank you.
It was, we heard in the testimony, previously paid out of general fund. And now it's paid out of the pilot fund. So it's not specifically a new town related expense out of town generated money. Other questions? Is that the piece that are we have any other parts in there that were
No, I understand that folks were most interested in learning about estimated new revenues from the local option that were just voted on across the state. So wanted to provide that information for y'all and a look on how that would play out in the pilot special fund, an estimated look based on the construct in the governor's recommended budget. So if y'all have any additional questions, I'm happy to look into them for you, but that's the information I have for you.
okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We are going to switch over, I think, to Logan to what? Well, yeah, I'm sorry, you got a 350 lockdown, right? Is that what it is, 345?
I do, I can, yeah, come back at 12:15.
Well, we need to break at that time anyway for the committee, so we'll be able to, we're gonna break shortly right after that and come back again at 4:15 if we can. We can't go past 4:30, so we're hitting for time, but we do have a bunch of time broken off for tomorrow morning. I want to hear, I don't know how long you have for your piece on what happened in Ways and Means and House appropriations yesterday. So I'd like to go there. Logan, if JFO can come up. While he's getting set, Monday in appropriations, House Ways and Means information was presented, 2 appropriations regarding the purchase and use tax and the adjustments that are going to be handled in the big bill, but they affect transportation monies. So we need to be aware of, everybody in the committee needs to be aware of what happened in House appropriations on Monday. It's not finalized, but it was presented. They're headed towards a straw vote on the big bill on Friday, which is why we have the pressure to get our bill out by tomorrow to kind of move that process along. But it is money, particularly if you recall the $10 million that, and when Logan's up, he'll walk us all through it. $10 million on the recommended budget that was leveraged for projects, primarily paving, but leveraged from $53 million in projects to get to $63 million more in spending heavily in the paving arena. That was adjusted into a percentage related to the amount of money that the transportation fund sends over to the education fund, and it's going to be reduced. Then there's some effort to true up the education fund, and now it looks like Logan is ready to take it over. So welcome back. It's been a little while. You can set the stage better than I probably did there.
Yeah, for the record, Logan Worth, the Joint Fiscal Office. Good thing Chris is here because he presented this actually in Ways and Means. So if I mess up any, he can correct me, but it's fairly straightforward for the most part. So splitting tax revenues across the 3 major funds, as we'll see, sort of the proposed construct sort of changes how some of the different revenue streams are allocated between the 3 major funds, the Ed Fund, the General Fund, and then the Transportation Fund. As a reminder, no policy recommendations in here. It's just sort of explaining what is going on right now. So as you all know, the GovRec had a proposal to sort of step down the purchase and use revenue that was going to the Ed Fund by $10 million per year. And then by FY 31, it would essentially be fully phased. So all purchase and use will be going to the T Fund. There will be no purchase and use will be going to the Ed Fund. As part of that proposal, in FY 27, it would essentially have reduced money going into the Ed Fund by $10 million. So there's a proposal to shift $10 million from the General Fund into the Ed Fund to sort of make the Ed Fund whole. And then there's the question of what would happen after FY 27, because we would be shifting money that was going into the Education Fund into the Transportation Fund. And so as you see there in the little chart, sort of the net impact to the Education Fund was an increasing amount, leaving the Education Fund and then going into the Transportation Fund. That's sort of how the GovRec proposed to do things. And then within the miscellaneous tax bill, as it exists in the bill currently, to my understanding, is that instead of doing the step down, there'd be a change in the purchase and use allocation to shift approximately $10 million from the Education Fund to the Transportation Fund. And we'd be doing that by changing the percentage of money that is allocated from that revenue. So the Ed Fund would go from the 1/3 that we know it currently gets down to 27%. And the T Fund would increase from the 2/3 up to 73%. And that would generate, it's about $9.9 million, but right around 10 million in FY 27, additional money for the T Fund, decrease for the Ed Fund. So then to backfill for the Ed Fund, they're changing the meals and rooms allocation by approximately $10 million. They do that by increasing the amount of money that the ed fund gets from that revenue stream to 29%, up from 25%, and decreasing the amount that goes to the general fund from 69% down to 65%. So this sort of avoids creating a hole in the ed fund after FY27, because this is an ongoing shift. So it's the shift to the purchase and use, but then there's also the shift in this meals and rooms, which sort of balances out those two funds. The general fund would lose out on the meals and room revenue on an ongoing basis, and the T fund would retain that larger share of the purchase and use on an ongoing basis. And you can see in the bottom chart there, sort of how these shake out. In FY27, T fund is up that 9.9 from the purchase and use. Education fund is down 9.9. And then with the meals and room change, the ed fund is up 10.8 and the general fund is down 10.8. So at the end of the day, ed fund is up slightly, about 900,000 in FY27, and you can follow that out going up to 31. And questions, or if Chris has anything to add quickly if I misspoke on any of that.
Richard, I think Logan did an excellent job covering this. Just to be really clear, because I will admit that I don't know when that ran these numbers. The instructions we were given was using whole round numbers of percentages. How do you get the closest to $10 million? And this is pretty close to net neutral, given the size of the tax bases involved for the education fund. Being up, 900,000 in a $2.5 billion fund is essentially neutral. But this scenario does avoid creating that, $21 billion hole, for lack of a better word, in the ed fund beginning in FY28. That in the absence of anything else happening to offset, the way the ed fund works is that gets paid by property taxes. So you can either reduce expenditures or raise some other revenue, but if all else is equal, the ed fund is very different than the other funds because it's expenditure driven. So property taxes have to be raised to fill the gap between what the expenditures are and what the non-property tax revenues generate. This is, I think, a step a little bit closer to the GovRex position than where folks might have been if they were just thinking about doing a one-time transfer, because this is a change in revenue policy that, although future legislatures can change, by making a change like this, you're giving instructions on how to build next year's budget and how the next revenue forecast should look. So there's a little bit more of an assurance than if you just make a one-time appropriation in a given year, because you don't necessarily know if you're going to have that money available next year. So this was included in the miscellaneous tax bill, H 933. Ways and Means introduced that. House approach heard it today. They have not voted on it yet. And I've noticed that 9.9 does not equal 10. I would also just like to remind the committee that the 26 BAA allowed the transportation fund to retain $292,000 that it otherwise would have been asked to pay back to the pilot fund for some excess receipts related to the town highway non-federal disasters. So that's a lot of words to say, like, I'm not worried about it being 9.9. Like, this is a wash in the big picture. There might be some verbiage we can suggest to the T-bill to make sure things, belt and suspenders balance out, but this is functionally the same as $10 million in 2017.
Representative Powell?
So just sort of the bottom line is transportation funds can get purchase and use back over time till it gets it all.
Yeah.
It would only be at 73.
It's a one-year commitment.
The change is being made to adjust it to 73%. And in the absence of future legislative action, it would stay at 73%.
They told us to lose their number after this year.
So it doesn't go back down.
So we'll no longer say 1/3 or 2/3, it's 73/27, but it's going to start out when they build the budget next year at 73/27.
That's exactly right. Like, there's not an automatic escalator and it's not a one-time deal. It is a change in the revenue split that would carry forward until the legislature decides to make another change.
But House Bill H 933 does not include a provision for an additional change on top of this the next year, but it does keep this structurally for next year.
Correct.
Representative Cohen?
So in order to like, it's FY 2031, those numbers from the education fund and the transfer to us and then the meals and rooms thing have to significantly reduce and increase. So we are taking roughly about 6% from the ed fund. Will be now over to the transportation fund this year. But if we don't reduce next year, the ed fund, which will be at 27%, down to say 21% and increase the transportation fund, we're just gonna keep getting 10 million extra a year, not building up to the 50 million until we get to where we want to be. Correct? We want like the 50 million more giving them. But now we're only going to be giving them about 40 million a year. Is that the way I'm supposed to be looking at this?
Yeah, the top of the sort of right side columns there would be what the ed fund would retain from purchase and use tax going forward. And you're absolutely right, Representative McCoy. There is not an automatic escalator built into the language to continue to ramp this up in futures. I would also just remind the legislature that even if there was, the legislature next year could change it.
But I mean, that's our goal, is to get the 50 million over a 5-year. Applying it. So next year we would actually, you look at these, it would be 20 million. And then the third year would be 30 million. And the fourth year would be 40 million. And then finally at the 50th year, we'd be to the 50 million a year of the purchase and use money.
My understanding is that was the governor's recommended
Correct.
budget, which is not handled inside the T-bill. It was handled here in this miscellaneous tax bill. That's the governor. Your position is what you're suggesting. It was the governor's recommend. What the House Ways and Means has presented and the House Appropriations Committee is considering is not the governor's recommend or Representative Keiser's bill. It's suggesting an adjustment of 27 and 73. So we'll no longer talk in terms of 1/3 and 2/3. We'll be potentially talking 27, 73. New math.
So I guess.
To me, what you're saying is, I think you understand.
This is going to be an ongoing fight in transportation to get our entire purchase and use tax back to zero, where it should be in transportation, to keep it all. Next year, we're gonna have to go back and say, well, thank you for the 10 million, but this year we want 20.
Based on my understanding of your position and the governor's recommended position, I would say you have that understood completely.
Okay.
So Representative Couch and then Representative Wells and then Representative White.
Another way to say this, it's a 1-year Band-Aid, good Band-Aid, 1 year. And, you either have to next year keep going after that or find other revenue for the transportation.
Yeah, I just want to
Fun.
it's not a one-time, not a one-time.
No.
It's a step. It is a step, and that would be a continuous. It would no longer, we're going to take that step. We're not going back. We're at that level there, and you're going to keep going, or you're at least going to be at that level. We're not coming back. So it's different than a one-time transfer because they're in effect agreeing for it to structurally be there for the next year. But it does not take another step.
So next year, we're gonna be fighting for 40 million. Like this year, we were like, it's 50 million. Next year, we're gonna be, it's 40 million.
Well, whatever that percentage breaks
Whatever
down,
the
but,
percentage. Around 40. Okay.
Representative Wells?
I'll yield to Representative White.
My question is, did the committees discuss the long term, like past this proposal for 2027? Knowing the governor's recommend,
Yeah, they did. Everybody's very focused on FY 27 right now. It's very difficult.
That was my
What
perception.
FY 28 would look like because any additional shifts obviously create a general fund pressure. And given the state of flux around the education fund, I think there was discussion around whether people were comfortable committing to a policy that would, in the absence of other actions, shift a significant additional costs on the property taxes at this time. But I think everybody was really looking at FY 27.
And the shift puts it on education on real means.
It really puts it on the general fund by
And
taking
then the general fund that has a surplus at this point
for now.
for now. This is not something that it's not in our committee. It's not something that we're doing, but this is an informational piece of what happened in Ways and Means and on the miscellaneous tax bill and what happened in appropriations. And they were discussing the funding for the transportation, but it's not in our committee. It's not in our jurisdiction. It's not in our piece. This is informational piece, right? I mean, can't take any action on it.
And our transportation budget that we're looking at pretty much stays the same.
Except for $100,000.
Yeah.
We've got ideas.
This is what happened yesterday. So that's what I want to make sure everybody knew. This is what happened. And again, today, I think, well, I thought I heard, but that's what happened yesterday.
I knew we missed good stuff on Mondays. We should be here.
You're welcome to come. I did YouTube it a little bit. So, other questions on this or comments? Okay, I appreciate that very much. I guess we are over to Logan. Not Logan, we're done with Logan. We're over to Damien. My bad. And only for about 10 minutes, then we're going to take a break and then we'll come back after probably about 4:20 to 4:30 for those that are still available. And we will, I'm not sure, we'll end up saving a lot of votes for tomorrow potentially. I like to have everybody here when we do that for our thumbs ups and thumbs down. So I try to stall on that to a certain degree. What I want you to do right now, though, Damien, if we could queue up to make sure everybody's got and that you have, and if there's any pieces and changes, we are, there is a new language being potentially proposed related to speed limits, the grant proposal process, and project cancellation. Two things that I think the committee felt could have probably used some more work based on what happened last year, and the speed limit issues related to all the discussion we've had around regional planning commissions and communities. There is language that I'm trying to make sure that everybody has and push that I would like to see in the T-bill related to the pilot fund information that we just had. There is mileage-based user fee that we still have to get worked on. Those are the pieces that are there. And there may be some other proposal that comes to markup tomorrow, but I want to make sure before we leave today that at least on those 4 pieces, that everybody's got the information, got the language, and got the opportunity for people to have any sort of discussion and move on those tomorrow. So, does that hopefully rings a bell? Everybody's got pilot language that we walked through last week, right? We have the new, if you can do it, and I bring up potentially language that I suggested.
AOT study.
Related to the speed limits, so that then everybody can, I believe it's also in your email. The purpose of this language was to address, to continue the further conversation on how speed limits are up and are moved. And we think there's other land use activity going on related to speed limits. For discussion of that in the Senate, we need to keep some attention to this scenario. So I don't know if you have that particular deals. We haven't seen the most recent version except in your email. I don't want to, well, I don't know how everybody feels, but I generally like to have, we usually have everybody here when we do thumbs up, thumbs down, but I don't know that we'll get to that spot.
Okay.
This is a short one and
should go quick. It's 2 pages. For the record, I'm Damien Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. And so what this bill does is it starts by saying, in addition to the ongoing work pursuant to Section 15 of last year's T-bill, which was the look at getting an inventory of the condition of municipal roads, the Agency of Transportation in consultation with the League of Cities and Towns and the Association of Planning and Development Agencies shall continue examining the requirements of 19 VSA 309C, which relates to the cancellation of locally managed projects, as set forth in last year's T-bill, to evaluate obligations, risks, and benefits imposed by the provisions, and to identify potential changes to the provisions to ensure that state and federal transportation funding resources are appropriately administered. So I paraphrased that a bit, but everything that I've just highlighted on the screen here is pulled verbatim from last year's T-bill, sort of generally summarizing what it is. And then I've cross-referenced back to the section which has more detail on the work that was undertaken last year. And so this is essentially saying continue working on that. Number 2 is continue evaluating the state town highway aid and municipal grant programs administered by the agency. Again, as set forth in last year's T-bill, to identify potential efficiencies and improvements related to those programs. So again, just please continue working on those programs. Continue that work you started last year. And then the final piece, and this is new, is examine the provisions in the Vermont statutes related to the procedures for establishing speed limits and identify potential opportunities to simplify and clarify those provisions to assist towns to meet local needs. And you might actually say to assist municipalities to meet local needs. This is was quickly drafted, so would that change be okay with the committee? Going from towns to municipalities? Okay. And then this directs the agency to submit to this committee and your Senate counterparts any recommendations for legislative action on or before January 15th, 2027. It does not call for another written report at this point. So basically saying recommend changes to us. You will be getting a report on the inventorying of local road conditions. But otherwise, you've gotten 2 reports already, and this is just saying, please propose some changes. Questions?
President Wood?
I'm just wondering on the second page, when you're saying examine the provisions of the Vermont statutes related to the procedures for establishing speed limits and identify potential opportunities to simplify and clarify those provisions. To simplify, clarify, or change, simplify and clarify kind of suggests working with what they've currently got and making it clearer, making it simpler, but does that also involve changing? Do we want to specifically say change? Or is this language doing what we think it should do?
Good question for the committee. So that is, as they say, above my pay grade.
Representative Pat?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think we've had some discussion anyways. And we had regional planning commission people come in to say, hey, in villages and towns, those downtown areas, we might want to provide municipalities more authority on setting speed limits. And I am reading this as only saying, hey, it's really confusing. What are the rules? Make it really clear. Doesn't say anything about pathways to allow municipalities to change speed limits, lower speed limits, I would assume. Yeah, or do anything else that's for that.
Representative Lau?
Yes, to that end, one of the, I'm wondering if this would cover provisions that might change or provide an alternative to the 1111 permit application, or doing some of these things. I'm not sure if the 1111 permit location is used to
So 1111 permit,
change the speed limit. I know it's used to do work in the right of way, but I don't know if it covers the.
so the speed limit provisions are covered under various areas of law. So you might encounter an 1111 permit if, for example, you want a speed advisory sign.
Yeah.
Something that tells you how fast you're going, if you're speeding, something like that.
For interventions that would help, right?
Right. Other signage, work in the right of way, entrances. Like, what am I leaving out, Michelle? If it's okay, Mr. Chair, for me to phone a friend.
It's always okay to go in that direction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The record, Michelle Bohauer, Agency of Transportation. I think the other framework related to speed, setting speed limits would be the speed study analysis, which could potentially involve needing an 1111 permit if you're going to be taking traffic count information in the right of way. I think just to clarify the agency's intent on offering this language, we heard Damien's presentation last week about kind of 6 different frameworks around the setting of speed limits and sort of how there may be inconsistency in statute about those provisions. And I think this was set up in coordination with the League of Cities and Towns, and speaking with Josh and Jason Rasmussen from the RPCs, to put our heads together, taking what we heard from Damien, taking the communications we heard from the committee around wanting to set context-sensitive speed limits in a way that makes appropriate sense, but also recognizes the importance of safety in speed limit setting, and how do we reconcile all that. I think in putting this language forward, lines 6 and 7 here at the bottom of the screen are where we come back with recommendations for action, which is, I think, what maybe Representative Couch and Representative White were trying to get at, like, and then what after you put your heads together? So that's kind of the wrapping up of where we were coming from on this.
I would and throw out a suggestion. I don't know if League of City of Town is available tomorrow morning or not. If we want to hear from them, we put them on the, we have some time in the morning, we can put them on the schedule to speak to this and to the local option tax proposal that we said that we had from today. We can do that if they're available. I didn't put them on the list for today, which is why I'm reluctant to go there. But we can do that, or we can, what I also appreciate what the agency is saying, I'm perhaps being a little more, I won't speak for the entire committee. I felt that what we saw in relationship to project cancellation and in relationship to smoothing out the possibility of making grant processes easier for our towns, municipalities, was less than what the committee had hoped for, which is why my intention to put it back into language for this. I don't think that the agency gave it the level of attention that perhaps we intended, and I'm saying that's why I wanted it back in here. And I don't think we have an answer on speed limits, which is what I'm trying to get at. I'm definitely not trying to limit where we should go with it, but I'm definitely, if we only have the next day to deal with it, I want a placeholder for the group that takes over at this point next year. I can't fix it and solve it, but I don't want to lose it. That's my intention. I don't think they've done a particularly strong job in these areas that we've asked them to focus on. And that's what I'm at, that's what I've asked them to work to get it on there. That's my whole intention. If we want to go further, or if we want to hear some more testimony, or want to change language, we got about a day left to do it. But that was my intention, was to put a placeholder in effect and make them do the work, make sure it gets picked up for this group for the next time. Representative Pouch.
Thank you. Did I hear VLCT and the planning associations had input on this language?
Yep, they are being consulted on all 3 of those items.
And I'm happy to bring them back tomorrow morning if they're available.
It would be just nice to say they agree, to do it or not. I mean, it's one thing to be consulted, I'm consulted at home a lot. It's not an automatic.
To help us move our work forward, I will go to them right now.
I think the language, put in there sort of satisfies where we're at now. I agree with the sentiment that clearly some of the municipalities are looking to lower speed limits. But I think the language below make recommendations does that. There's some confusion and clarification needs to happen with what we have as current statute and ability. And then once that's sorted out, maybe there needs to be new proposed language, and that's all allowed in that study.
Okay. Do we have a change to make in there, right? There was a language earlier.
Already made.
And you know what, given that we have markup on the thing is first in the morning, unless, I know we need to go to a break too, unless you, Representative Lally, unless you want to say something now or say something tomorrow. Otherwise, we're gonna, Representative Burke has her hand up, I'm sorry. Representative Burke?
Oh, yeah, I'm just, sorry. Remember? But, you know, we talked a lot about how actually lowering the speed limit doesn't necessarily change behavior. But what it does is other kinds of street design. So I just wonder, you know, add that into that language, examining the provisions. So I'm just reading this very quickly. So relating to the procedures for establishing speed limits, and if we could say solving speeding problems or something like that. That everybody works that in, or if that matters, or if it's.
Matters to you, I'll second.
Representative Lally, go ahead.
Yeah, I would support that too, because it clarifies what our intent is in the absence of not yet having the completed multimodal guidance. So I think it
Just look at, don't just look at the speed that let's, say it will get everything.
right. Well, I don't want us to sort of have multimodal guidance as sort of this nice thing that we have, and then it's not usable. I want it to be as easy to use as other things that we prioritize. So,
Okay.
and, you know, we are the policy committee that is taking the lead on combining transportation with land use. This is not coming from our other committees in this body, that imperative. And I want to continue that progress, because I think, as I've said before, that is going to be what makes land use reform and revitalization of our municipalities actually successful and doable. So I think that that's an important provision. So I ask you, Representative Burke, to say what you said and to just add on to this.
Examine the provisions, clarify, related to the procedures for establishing speed limits and and controlling speed or something.
Implementing traffic calming
Yeah.
measures.
Okay,
That work.
Yeah.
this is what we're gonna do. Representative Lally, Representative Burke, agency's still here. We can flag Damien down. We have till tomorrow morning. We're gonna work on this all day tomorrow with, I think we have our ledge council most of the day. The agencies made themselves available and will, I'm sure, continue to make the peace. I would probably extend an invitation to the leagues of cities and towns for a few minutes tomorrow at some point, if they're available. And tomorrow is, unless this next meeting we're headed to in the next few minutes changes something, I will let you know that it does or doesn't. But my understanding, but we're headed to find out an update. We have to have this done tomorrow before we leave. So
The whole bill?
the whole bill has to be done tomorrow before we leave, unless I hear differently we hear differently in the next 20 minutes, half hour. I will let you know if we hear differently, but that's currently the plan. Everything that's going to go in the T-bill from here, including mileage-based user fee, it's going to be done before the end of the day tomorrow. We are And I know that everybody's got things they have to go to, so we are adjourned for today. And we'll be back for 9 tomorrow. Please work with the agency and the Ledge Council. It's got to be an agreed upon language if we're going to make some changes. The agency's got a comment on it. If we can't get that, then won't have anything, or we'll have to come up with something we can agree to. And that is also the case on the local options tax and on the other subjects we got it. We're adjourned.